ThinkGoodPodcast, where therapists talk about TV shows, movies, books, and life.
All right, welcome back to the Think Good Podcast. Today we are going to tackle a new topic based off of a new media form. As you know from our first two episodes, we've talked about current events, we've talked about a TV show. Today we're going to talk about a book that has been pivotal for both of us in our career called Flourish by Martin Seligman. Tell us a little bit about Marty and,
I like to call him Marty.
and his book Flourish.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, Marty Seligman he was one of the founders of positive psychology, right? So this book, Flourish, really kind of gets into the foundation of positive psychology and kind of talks about how to flourish in our life. And so I thought it would be really important to talk about this book because not just the ideas behind what is positive psychology and what is flourishing, but what is it not?
I just got a joke that came to me that I
about
couldn't
Marty?
hold in.
Marty?
No.
Oh.
So when people say be positive, they're talking about the life and work of Martin Seligman.
Or are you talking about blood type?
Yeah. This is our sense of humor, folks.
Be positive.
So what's the difference here between this, just be positive and what is positive psychology?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I can get past this joke. If I'm being honest. Because for those of you wondering, I'm AB negative. Oh, I can't.
Okay, so what is positive psychology?
Yeah. So positive psychology really gets into the study of human strengths, positive emotions, and virtues. And so I think it often gets misconstrued around being interpreted as just being happy. And I think that is why I really appreciated Marty's book because it really talked about more. He's adamant about the fact that being happy isn't enough. Wanting to be happy isn't enough, right? What are the actions that we take and what's within us to achieve that? And so we'll get into that a little bit later in terms of the model that he uses. But really this branch of psychology kind of allows us to look at kind of action-oriented ideas and what is the model that allows us to achieve this. Happiness is so subjective. And so to be able to look within to say, okay, how do we experience positive emotions? And I think that's really what's different about it.
Yeah, and I like what you said there because sometimes at the beginning of therapy, people will say, I just want to be happy or I want to be happier.
Yes.
And that's important. It's a good starting point. But what does happy mean?
Yeah.
It's not just the absence of, hardship or sadness or whatever, right? There's an active process. And like you said, it's very action oriented. And that's what I really loved about how he has framed positive psychology and broken it down is that it seems to be something that we can achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is probably a big takeaway from this book and why I enjoyed it so much is because he really lays out a model of the positive psychology and really looking into not just theory in a way that I'm sure academics read this, but I also think anybody who picks up this book can really understand Martin Seligman's process of even getting to this theory. He does a lot of self-disclosure here. He talks about his own research and he kind of just gets into what he studied early on and how he got here. And so I thought it was just it felt like a little historical too in that way. And I thought that it was just a really interesting read. It wasn't too dense or heavy or academic. I know it's used in college campuses around any courses around positive psychology, but I also think it's a great read because I don't feel like it's too academic.
Yeah, and I remember, and if you haven't picked up on this, I'll be asking you a lot about this because you have read this book, I've read this book, but you've also taken a course on positive psychology.
Yes,
Is that right?
Yeah. So in my doc program, there was a specific course on Marty Seligman. I think that's why I call him Marty because I feel like, him and I took a class. He didn't teach it, but got really close to the theory around positive psychology and that time of when it was kind of a little bit newer, almost, I will say, because this is now I'm like aging myself, but this is like at least 10 to 12 years ago, right? And so this book was written in 2011. So I think people were just starting to get familiar with positive psychology and trying to understand like what is this? Is this just about being happy? Is this laughing? Is this humor? Is this? So I thought that like that course was really helpful in framing what positive psychology is and talked a lot about Marty.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to talk too about, kind of this parallel rise of positive psychology and just kind of the shift in how we think about mental health and wellness in general, right? Is a proactive process to be well.
Yeah.
And, I think the medical model is very deficits based, right? If there's something wrong, go see your doctor.
Yeah.
Or if there's something wrong, go see your therapist.
Yes.
And so for a long time, we've been operating on this: when things are going wrong or when you're injured in some way, that is when you seek help or
Yes.
support. And I like how this kind of parallels this change, because in my career, a lot of, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of language has been strengths based.
Yes.
Right? What
Yes.
not only is going wrong or is difficult in this person's life, but what do they do well? And how do we make that kind of a center part of treatment rather than just a consideration?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you've had this in treatment before, but like I've had clients come in and be like, oh man, like this is actually a really good week. I don't really know what to talk about. And I'm like, well, that's what we're going to talk about. Like, why was it good, right? What happened that made it positive? And I think sometimes therapy has this reputation of like just coming in to talk about the hardship and talk about the challenges. And I do think a majority of our work is that, navigating that. But I also think there's this like kind of beautiful uncovering of like maybe I just had a really good week and I didn't pay much attention as to like why it was good. And so therapy can be used as such a wonderful tool in that way to kind of peel back some of those layers and say, "Oh, wait, like it was really simple. I just did things I enjoyed, or there wasn't conflict here, or I had a moment to myself, or I got more FaceTime with like my friends, or things that we don't necessarily think about. We just do. And I think that's what I love about Flourish is that it talks about achieving this learned optimism, right? And oftentimes we hear about trying to be happy and what are we trying to gauge and just what are we trying to get out of. And I think the learned optimism is the frame through which we see, the lens through which we see ourselves and our life. And so if we can really get to a place where we're thinking about how we're not all born like happy or sad, or like all of these things are learned, right? Socially. And so I think this theory is so fascinating to me because it feels like it took a long time to get here. So to me, like I kind of like nerded out on this book a little bit early on because I was like, wow, we talk a lot about learned helplessness, which was also coined by Marty, but learned hopelessness and kind of all of these depressive moments that we go through episodically, right? Like depression can be in episodes. But we don't often talk about the happiness and we don't really talk about that optimism and the positive moments.
And really what we're doing is developing a blueprint,
Yes.
right? And why it's so important. One of the exercises I do with clients at the beginning of therapy is, kind of an assessment of where you're at with your stressors, what those are, how stress shows up in your body. And the first question on that worksheet is, when I'm feeling well, I am. And the instruction is to fill that in. And sometimes people struggle the most with that one because it's supposed to be our kind of our default, or our kind of what we take for granted almost.
Yeah.
Is, okay, I didn't have stress this week, so it was a good week, like you were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
But what made it that way? What
Yeah.
were you like when you were feeling good, when you were feeling happy? What were you doing more of or less of? And what I really love about this is he's given us this model, this blueprint to follow and to pay attention to,
Yeah.
in terms of being positive, which is more than just being happy, or like I say sometimes, like it's more than just rainbows and unicorns, right? And that can look different for different people, or depending on where you're at
Yeah,
in life.
absolutely.
You mentioned a couple terms that before we get into his model,
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could define. You said learned helplessness,
Yes.
and then on the other side of that sounds like learned optimism.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about each of those, and especially the learned helplessness
Yeah.
piece, and then we'll talk about optimism, of course, as we go.
Yeah, so like in the 60s and 70s, that's kind of where Marty's research was going, was he helped coin that term of learned helplessness. And this is really a term we often use in our field with depression specifically, right? Of the fact that when we are depressed, what happens when we start to feel like we don't have any control and things are just kind of happening to us? And so a lot of the research that was going on was like, wait a second, we weren't born just being helpless, right? Like that's very much learned. That's a learned outcome. And so if something happens enough, we start to believe that it's going to continue to happen. And so with helplessness and those depressive outcomes, this is where the research got into both animal research and human research. We started to find that enough things would happen that were difficult or challenging. We were learning to be helpless. And so that really helped us within the field to kind of understand depression, and also helped us understand why the thinking was happening the way it was, why the actions were oriented that way, because life was just sort of like happening and there wasn't any agency or control that we were feeling like in those moments. In that same vein, learned optimism is, well, if we can learn, if we can be socialized in this way, and if we can just learn to be sad and learn to be like not have control in our lives, is there a way for us to learn to see the world like something is achievable for us, or that there is quote happiness through this model that Marty talks about? Can we get there? Is there a form of learning that can happen? And so I think that's a very, very basic way to think about it. I'm not going to get into like super academic terms, but I think that's like the simplest way to kind of describe that.
I think it's good to think about it too as, positive versus negative in terms of math terms, right? Where
I knew you were going to go to math.
of course,
Yeah.
and being able to move forward, and being able to move forward doesn't mean that everything is exactly where you need it to be and the smoothest, but that you can engage certain skills and tools to do so. And this feeling that I can't help my my status in life, or my mood, or the things that happen to me, is learned because you've been rightful, or not rightfully, but it's valid that you have been moved
Absolutely.
backwards
Yes,
in a
yes.
negative direction.
Yes.
And you've been doing that for a long time, or enough things have happened in that direction to feel like it's too tall a mountain to
Yes.
climb.
Yeah.
And so, and again, this learned piece is going to be really important, because that in and of itself is optimistic to me. That if I have learned something in this direction, then I can learn or unlearn that,
Yeah.
and learn something else to replace that.
Yeah, and it's just like when you, and I don't know if I use this term a lot in my sessions, but like this unpairing that we do, right? We try to pair, well, every time I go here, do this, this happens. Every time X happens, every time I do X, Y happens. And so I think this unpairing that we really have to do, it's really intentional and it's really hard work. Like it makes a lot of sense that we would just feel defeated over situations being difficult over and over again. And so how do we pause and slow down and say, is there a way for me? It's not about seeing the silver lining, but what are the parts of my life right now? Like what can I achieve that brings me calm, that brings me joy, that makes me feel centered or grounded? Like what am I tethered to? And so I think oftentimes with positive psychology, it gets kind of a bad rap a little bit, that it's just about being happy, and it's like, like I'm depressed and I don't really believe in this. And it's like, I hear you and I get that, but I also think this is something that if you really study it and learn these parts, I think I said this to you before we were recording, it feels digestible, like it feels like manageable to be like, oh, here's the model and here are the things we need to do. That doesn't mean everyone that applies this is going to be happy, but it's kind of like a roadmap to get there, to try to feel that.
Yeah, and I think let's get into the model because I
Yeah.
think that it's so such an important, encapsulation of what we're talking about in terms of the tangibles around positivity.
Yeah.
Okay. So the model to remember it easily is PERMA,
Yes.
PERMA.
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk through each of these
Yeah.
one at a time. So P, the first one, is positive emotions.
Yeah.
What makes us feel good?
Exactly. So, really looking at, in the same way that we talk about negative emotions, what are the positive emotions that we have? What are the ones that we have experienced? And what are the circumstances and situations that we've been in that have allowed us to demonstrate these positive emotions, right? So, I think it's important to remember that, like, we all have them, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of grounding.
And I think a good exercise here is if you're not familiar with the feelings wheel,
Yes.
feelingswheel.com,
Yes, I use it a
okay?
lot.
Go to the happy triangle part of the feelings wheel and name the feelings that you want to feel more of
Yeah.
and then pair that with what helps you feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like really basic, but I often will use the feelings wheel when we talk about like joy or excitement or laughing, humor, connection. Like these are all positive emotions too, right? They're not just, quote, happy. And I think that's where we have to kind of expand a little bit of our own vocabulary of kind of understanding what is a positive emotion for us. Because oftentimes we're not thinking about it like that broadly.
Yeah. So the next one, I really love this one
Yes.
and the concept that comes along with this because this is really, what we're all kind of working towards
Yes.
without sometimes even realizing it.
Yeah.
And so this one is engagement,
Yeah.
right? But another word for this is flow.
Flow. Yep. So
Talk to us
they,
about flow.
yeah. So they, Marty kind of gets into, um, Marty gets into engagement and talks about flow as this very specific state where you're doing something very enjoyable, you're feeling very connected to, it's strength based. I think some of the examples he gave in the book were like if there's a sport that you're really into, instrument, like something that you're doing. I think we think about them sometimes as like hobbies, but that flow state or that engagement state, at least in my brain, always goes to like dopamine. Like I always think about like endorphins. I always think about what are we trying to get out of it and how like connected are we feeling in this state?
How does somebody get into a flow state? Because I think of this as like an alignment of sorts, mind, body, soul, different parts of you all kind of working together in unison, in harmony. But how do we tap into our flow state?
That's such a good question. I think a lot of it, and I talk about this in therapy too, not even using the word flow, but I think when we're centered and we're grounded, so much of it is being present. So we could really like, so for example, when I think about like prayer, for example, or meditation or anything that I'm doing that requires concentration, your brain can be in a different place, like right a mile a minute, thinking about your to-do list. Like you can go through the motions, you can do the thing you're supposed to do or that you want to do, but are you present? And that kind of brings us to this whole mindfulness theory, right? Which is like, how do you wash dishes and like pause and say, the water's warm, so I can feel the soap on my hands. I think about that in flow state, which is that can you really achieve a flow state if you're not present? Like if you're not in what you're doing and you're not centered there, it's going to be pretty hard to achieve that.
Yeah. And this is where I think sometimes I'll talk with folks about, what are their creative juices
Yeah.
and what are their creative interests. And a lot of times as adults, unless you work in a creative field,
Yeah.
you're probably not exercising those muscles as often.
Yes.
And so what are those things? And this is where I think hobbies is not the right or doesn't encapsulate it fully, right?
Yes.
Because hobbies are either easy to put to the side, to deprioritize, but really these are also maybe mechanisms for us to get into flow states or access kind of those things that work all parts of our brain and require us to be present and kind of
Absolutely.
fully aware in the moment.
Yeah, and I think in therapy we talk about like I don't know if you've seen this in sessions too, but I'll often through life transitions like do exercises with clients to say like when was the last time you did something new or even did something that you like miss or used to do or enjoyed? And like you said, I don't even think it's about hobbies. I sometimes just think it's like an area of interest or like curiosity or just slowing down to see like what you're into. And I think a lot of us went through this in COVID. I don't know if you remember. I um I went to Joann Fabric and I bought some yarn and then I ended up getting in a fight with customer service and then I never did anything with it. But I had this thought and idea of like, oh, I would love to crochet or I would love to sew I was like thinking a lot in COVID. People were taking up so many different things because we were at home and it kind of made me think about the state that we were in. Like a lot of people felt trapped, but a lot of people also started to discover things that maybe they had never thought about at home, whether that was like fitness, whether that was trying something new, whether that was, I mean, there were so many things. I don't know if you thought about that yourself or even
I
with
I
clients.
remember, getting in much more into cooking, and I had already loved to cook, but I never had such true free time
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
and get all the ingredients for some like complicated dish and from scratch
Yeah.
make it and then not feel the pressure to have to do it by a certain time or and I remember in those moments there were times where I would put my my AirPods in or whatever, and I would forget to turn music on because as soon as I would start to like make the food, I I was not thinking about anything
Oh,
else.
wow.
And
Yeah.
that was the first time that I realized that cooking for me was something I needed to actively have part of my life
Yeah.
to access that kind of peace of mind.
That's such a good example of flow state. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I made really good food that I've never made since because then the world opened back up and there was,
Yes.
all the deadlines came back. So,
Yeah.
okay, so engagement, flow
Yes.
state,
Yep.
a big one here. Next one are
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah, so I love this one because we're talking a lot about this idea of like why humans need each other, right? Like it's not about one specific relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, a partnership, your friendships, your family relationships. How do we connect with each other? I mean, think about all of the studies that were done with individuals who are terminal, who lived longer by having a community and a family and friend connection, right? Like these groups. It's the entire theory behind like group psychotherapy too. This learned connection that we have with people. What does it mean to have this relationship with other people? I think is huge. There's so much input that we get and so much nourishment that we receive, both in and out. And so I think this is such a big part of this model.
And there's more research coming out on this kind of impact on health of
Yes.
relationships. And
Yes.
two things that stick out to me, I read a book recently, and they talk about in certain countries that have higher life expectancies than places like the United States, where we have really high level medical care
Yeah.
available. But because of the closeness to the family system
Yes.
or healthy social relationships, they're finding that people are living longer.
Yeah.
And there are and I can't get into all the science of
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but they're literally finding physiological markers of longevity because of healthy relationships
Oh,
and a
absolutely.
culture that's built around those relationships. And then the other one, just to guilt trip all of you parents out there, that grandparents live longer when they see their
Oh,
grandchildren more often.
wow.
So that one was one that really
Yeah.
stuck out to me.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I think like so much of our research is coming out now about relationships too, and these longitudinal studies where we're also learning about, and I think given our world and COVID and the time that we've all spent together, I'm actually very curious about like research that's being done right now that's going to come out, right? Because you tend to have more fathers that have been home in this like traditional like heteronormative relationships, the commuting moms, dads, like parents, like what has it been like to work from home? How have our relationships changed, us like all being under one roof, marriages, divorce rates, all these things. So I think relationships in general, just have really changed like in our lifetime, especially in the last 5 years. And these studies will be really imperative. But I love the way Marty talks about them in terms of this connection, for us, like this human connection of input.
And this is a reminder for all of you to be okay with going back in person. Because I think sometimes we rely a little bit too much on technology.
Sure.
Like, hey, I sent this meme to my friend, so we're technically staying in touch, right? Versus, can I pick up the phone and call them, or can we, if we're in the same city, can we have a coffee
Yeah.
date and just catch up? And I think that's kind of gone away because we can do the asynchronous texting or voice notes even or whatever it might be. And I think what we're missing is that direct connection piece
yeah.
in this, technology is great. We need to leverage it for so many things. But I think this is one thing that technology doesn't replace completely.
I totally agree. And I always have thought about technology as like supplemental rather than this kind of like primary source. I think oftentimes there's limitations. You live far away, FaceTime is amazing. I mean, think about when our parents were like writing letters in India and Pakistan, and like, do you remember like the telegrams? Like my parents would be like, yeah, there's like these like blue telegrams that would like come from Pakistan. So yeah, we have come a long way. But I absolutely agree. Like we need that human connection.
Yeah. We would call and then say, hey, can you go get this person
Oh.
from their house? We'll call back in 20 minutes. And, hope to connect, right?
Yeah.
Across time zones, all of that. How hard we worked.
Yeah.
And now it's so much easier to connect.
Yeah.
And so maybe we take that for granted. But I think, even when I have sessions in person, I notice that I have a deeper connection and understanding with my clients and vice versa.
Yeah.
Than via Zoom. It can still be
Yeah.
effective. You can still make it work, right? But that in-person connection, that direct connection piece is really vital. Okay, so M is meaning.
Yes.
What's that mean?
Such a good question. We're talking about like core motivations, right? Like the purpose. So you can't just have this almost like topical approach. You really want to understand the core meaning, maybe what's underneath, what is the motivation here? Why are we doing the things we're doing? That depth, that's what I'm thinking about.
The word that comes to mind for me when you talk about meaning is intention.
Yeah.
Like setting your intention, saying, maybe saying out loud, why am I doing this? One thing I talk about with clients sometimes is setting boundaries around social media. And so like imagining if you, instead of just kind of mindlessly opening up Instagram or Reddit or whatever it is, you actually said like, I'm getting on social media to doom scroll, right? Or you said, okay, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes
Yes.
and do that, right? It's much more kind of concentrated and there's purpose. And, we need to find purpose in sometimes the small things.
Just laughing because I'm thinking about every human that's just like, yep, time to doom scroll. That'd be like all of us every day.
It would be
one eye
wild.
open.
Sitting on the train and everybody's
Yeah.
like, I'm going to doom scroll now. It's a pretty funny picture.
It feels like it's like end of the world movie.
Absolutely.
It's like a Judd Apatow
Absolutely.
movie.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes we get into our routines and we just get into the grind of the day to day that we start to, we know why we're doing those things. And if we
Yeah.
stop to think, we know. But sometimes that stopping to think goes away. And that can,
Absolutely.
in and of itself, draw meaning and remind you kind of what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
Right? What are the bigger picture items here that I'm doing the day-to-day grind, again, finding meaning, defining what that means to you.
Yeah, and it grounds us, right? Like it allows
Absolutely.
us to kind of know we feel some direction. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so the last one here, the A in the PERMA model is accomplishment.
It is. And we're laughing because we didn't know if it was achievement or accomplishment because they're interchangeable. But here's the thing. Accomplishment, I mean, we're talking about what we're trying to achieve, right? So it makes sense. It starts with an A. It makes sense.
Yeah, and I think really the idea here is like task oriented, goal
Yep.
oriented thinking around what is achievement, right?
Yes.
Because our brain loves dopamine, right? We
Absolutely.
love dopamine.
Absolutely.
And we get dopamine when we accomplish something or
Yes.
achieve something.
Or achieve something. Yes. And I think like that's kind of most important, right? We can start things, we can think about things, we can sort of plan things out, but what is it really going to take to accomplish or achieve, right? What are the steps that it takes and how do we kind of orient ourselves to a specific goal? We know statistically goals are more likely achieved the more specific they are. So that makes like so much sense, right? That we would be like laying out what our goals are and just trying to achieve them.
Yeah, and I really think about the SMART goal model in terms of, it being an acronym,
Yes.
specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely, and breaking down goals into these pieces and actually identifying, especially those measurable pieces,
Yes.
the kind of the timeline of the overall goal, right? If I say to you, I want to have more money, you could give me $1 and technically the goal is achieved. But that's probably not what I mean, right? So I need to define that goal further to include more specifics, right? Do I want to have $10,000? And then why do I want that $10,000? What's the meaning of that,
Sure,
right? The purpose
sure.
of that. And then when do I want to achieve it by? When is the halfway point, right? And being able to check in on these things is really important because I know there's a lot of us out there who say, well, I haven't achieved the final goal yet, so I can't celebrate anything yet. Or I can't recognize that the
Yeah.
progress that I've made. And I think what this is talking about is that's important, right?
Absolutely. And like, what are the steps that we're going to take to get there, right?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that a lot. You and I are turning 40 this year. And so thinking a lot about just like goals and where, these milestone birthdays kind of bring that up, right? Like, where do I want to be? Where was I at 30? Where do I want to be at 50? And so that's kind of been a lot of what I've been reflecting on lately. And it makes a lot of sense to kind of understand. I mean, even going back to meaning, like what is underneath all of that? What's the core value or understanding as to why I want to achieve these things?
And I think what we're realizing as we have this conversation is all of these things work in
Absolutely.
unison.
Absolutely.
And they're connected. They don't live in their own silos. That we need to kind of find a way to put these pieces together, and that they, when you work on one area, you're working
Yeah.
really on all of the areas.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about what do we do with this information? How do we apply it? So I know there was something that I took away from that book that I've used quite a
Yes.
bit.
Yeah.
And it's a gratitude exercise. And the exercise, to sum it up, is to think of somebody who meant something to you, that did something for you at some point in your life, and someone who you haven't had the chance to properly thank or acknowledge for the role that they've played or the impact that they've made. And and if I remember correctly, Marty, our friend, instructs us to write a letter to that person. And then the twist is that you go and deliver that
Yes.
letter and read that to the person,
Yeah.
which is really powerful. And how I kind of adapted it was at an event for Brown Man Therapy. I had the whole room
Yes. I remember.
close their eyes, reflect on a person, and then in their phones or wherever to kind of write down a message. And then I think I asked everybody to kind of send that message or consider sending the message to that person. And you were in the crowd.
I was, and I remember that just being so powerful. I mean, that wasn't even the step of giving it to that person, right? But it was like so powerful to kind of pause, think about someone, and then write it out to them, because I think so often, again, this goes back to being present. We're just moving through life and we're like, oh, I appreciated that. That was good. That was fine. But do we really slow down to say, like, I want this person to know, like, this was so meaningful to me. And if we could do more of that, what would that mean for that person? What would that mean for us?
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, it was a wonderful exercise.
So that's like a big, maybe one time or once in a
Yeah.
while kind of exercise. Is there any other sort of gratitude exercise that you might
Yeah.
suggest for folks to do daily or regularly?
Yeah, so I mean, I actually love I love the idea of gratitude in like very simple forms. There's ways in which you can keep a gratitude journal, name 2 to 3 things you are grateful for throughout the day, connect with like the people that you live with or see to just say thank you or appreciate them. There's the bigger gestures of like writing a letter. One of the things I actually loved was nature walks and just like the gratitude for like where you are, where you live, what you see, even our own senses, our own body. And so being able to experience that like gratitude within. But I think anything centered around really having to pause and experience and demonstrate that gratitude is huge.
Yeah, and I think gratitude goes beyond just saying thank you for
Yes.
something, but and I think this was an example in his book where he instructs us to kind of say thank you or what you're thankful for like that day.
Yeah.
And why. And one of the examples that I remember is, okay, a husband brings home ice cream for his wife, unprompted. And what you would write is,
Notes. Yes.
I'm thankful for my husband because he is thoughtful, right? And what that does is, in that moment, you recognize something positive in the other person, and then something that you appreciate, some meaning,
Yeah.
right? And again, connects you to that person, and really makes you think about, what gives you gratitude.
Yeah.
Right. And so I really love that. That's something that has stuck with me, over the years since reading it.
Yeah. And I think like he does a good job too in that book, like when we're talking about gratitude, the small things, like really being in consideration, things that we can just talk about daily and access. And so I love that because I also don't, and I talk about this in therapy, you don't want gratitude to feel like this big, huge thing that you have to kind of like sit down and do, but like really accessible, really simple. And so I think that's important because, again, it makes it more achievable and digestible.
Yeah. One thing my wife started, which it's been inconsistent, but that happens with these kinds of things, is she created like a jar, gratitude jar,
Yeah.
and like a small Post-it and a pen, just left it at the front of our house, like on our way out. And we originally started it as like a daily,
Yeah.
try to do it daily, but it's kind of like whenever I saw it, doing it. And I know that it's wild, but like it changed my mindset for the day.
Wow,
Like
I love
walking out the
that.
door
Yeah.
changed my mindset immediately to focus on something positive. Super powerful. And again, these are small things that we can do that take seconds
Yeah.
and can really have a physiological, literal impact on our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences.
That's beautiful. I love that.
What else can we do? We talked about flow.
Yep. Flow state.
We talked about relationships. Anything else that is a good takeaway for folks who haven't read Flourish that they can incorporate or pay attention to as they move forward?
I mean, I think the one thing that made me think a lot about this book is just, I think sometimes when you're going through hardship, your positive emotions are just like really lost on you. You think that it's like this time that used to be, or you think that it was this perfect, the stars had to align and something perfect had to happen. And so I think one of the takeaways for me is just kind of tapping within to be like, you experience positive emotions. You can experience positive emotions a lot. It may not be like a giant period of time or an entire episode or like weeks or months or years or the whole day, but to kind of pay attention to how we're feeling, because I do think that there's like these little pockets of time where we might take it for granted or we might not be aware of it. I think about that all the time. I can have a really tough day, and one of my kids will say something or do something, and I'm it's like smiling, and I'm like catching myself, and then it's kind of like back to the stress or back to the strain or back to whatever's happening. But I think Flourish really made me try to be more mindful of those moments and just kind of pause. And again, work in progress because the grind. But I like to think that that was a big takeaway for me.
I think it's okay to access happy feelings even during a hard period.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm hearing, like on a tough day, how powerful it is to be able to laugh.
Yeah.
On a hard day, when everything is telling you to probably cry or to kind of break down or to shut it down, to access those positive feelings is not just okay, I'm going to be happy or like kind of force myself to change my mindset completely, but just to access something that gives you that optimism,
Yes.
that outlook, and that perspective that, something is okay, something is good. And I think this is something that I think comes up with grief work, right? This idea that like grief, if we're grieving something, the loss of something, someone, that we're supposed to only be sad or angry or
Yes.
upset in some way. But part of grief is too experiencing some sort of joy, nostalgia, whatever that is, as you kind of reflect on that loss, right? And, and I think that's something that's important to kind of take away, because I think we get into these places where we think, okay, things are really hard, unforeseen challenges, traumas, whatever it might be that you're experiencing. And so I'm not allowed to access positive feelings. But really, I think that goes back to this like learned optimism, right?
That's exactly
Is that
right.
this is an active
Yeah.
process that you can choose to take control of.
Yeah, and we're also demonstrating what we've learned, what we've seen, right? And so it makes total sense that we would say, oh, do I have permission to do this? Am I allowed to do this? When I've seen my parents in hardship, we weren't really laughing. We were just kind of getting through. And so it really goes back to this idea of like learned environments.
Yeah. Okay, so quick recap here
Yeah.
of the PERMA model,
Yes.
which
What
tells
does
us
the A stand for?
accomplished, accomplishment, or achievement.
Or achievement? I don't
It's
know.
up to you.
Yeah.
Pick your favorite A, and that's one. So that's the A.
Oh, I have to name them again?
Yeah, this is a quiz.
Oh, positive emotion,
Okay.
engagement,
Okay.
relationship,
All right.
meaning,
There you go. An
and
accomplishment.
accomplishment.
What an accomplishment
Wow.
that was. Well, that to me was really great, because I know you have taken a course on positive psychology, and I think it's something that is really worth understanding. Because too, there's a lot of language out there, when we think about like pop psychology,
Yeah.
around just being positive
Yes.
and trying to, find the silver lining, that kind of thing. But really, I think what Marty and you have outlined here is there are real scientifically backed ways to build positivity, and to take an active role and control of that process is really empowering.
I love it. Great recap. Me and Marty, same page.
So go check out Flourish, go check out Martin Seligman, just a G in our field.
Yeah, big
So,
time. Big time.
Hopefully you get a chance to read Flourish or learn about it, or you've learned everything that you needed to know today.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
until next time, this has been the Think Good Podcast.
I don't have a cool takeaway yet. Cut.